All right, it's 4:30.
Brooks, Kushner,
Here.
Lund,
Here.
Bentley,
Here.
Holmberg.
Here. Adoption of agenda. Move to adopt. Second.
Kushner,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Bentley,
Yes.
Holmberg.
Yes. Item number 3, presentation. We're here for the fiscal 2021, 2022 budget discussion. Marcella, it looks like you're up first.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, or late afternoon, however you want to look at it. So we'll talk about budget. We'll just start off today with talking about some of where we've been and where we're looking to go for 22. And we started out with the strategic planning session that was held on March the 1st. And the basis of those discussion, just as a reminder, are those 5 focus areas of investment in infrastructure, the community pride and interaction, growth and investment, regional draw, employee morale, and retention. So the budget for 22, as we develop it, will still continue to focus on these. And with the important discussion items of stormwater utility, a stormwater master plan to be completed. And if we were to establish a utility, it would require a vote of the people based on revised Missouri statute 640907. The ISO pieces, we've talked about that a little bit and the improvements that we've made to our ISO and the continued improvements to that. The wage and benefits. So wage study analysis was complete and we're working on updating that as we develop the 22 budget. And thank you for approving the increases to salaries for staff that was recently done as part of the last half of 21. The performance evaluations will be underway for a 6-month review, and we will do those again as annual reviews for potential processes or calculations of any raises that might be afforded in 22. As I mentioned, the update to the pay scale. The community marketing, we're continuing to work with that. As we get into McGuire Phase 1, thank you to the citizens of Warrensburg for approving a $17 million bond issue. And so that will be a big project. There's also grant money that's being applied for to help with the funding of that project to make that happen. We'll continue to work on the bike trails and the walking trails. As mentioned, the general obligation bonds were approved in April. The half-cent sunset or the half-cent sales tax is scheduled to sunset December 31st of 2025. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into some detail and the possible option to take that back for reapproval or to renew that in April of 22 as we finish up actual adoption of budget for 22. The public safety sales tax, we had asked our representative to add Warrensburg to the list of several cities in the region that were asking for the public safety sales tax. Unfortunately, that basically died in session this last couple of weeks based on some things that the legislation wanted to add or piggyback, however, whichever terminology you want to use for that. So we will ask representatives again to pre-file that, including Warrensburg with the December 1st, 2021 pre-file option for the 22 legislative session. So that's still very much something we want to do and something we'll talk about. And as legislation lets us do that, then we can develop a plan to make that happen. The Hawthorne NID debt currently requires a transfer from general fund to meet that debt payment. As we sell lots out there, then that will help reduce that. We had originally planned for 21 to have a sale of a lot. We had an option that has passed at this point. So in the budget amendment that we will be talking about in regular session later tonight, there is a request to add a transfer from general fund to the NID for $110,000 to meet the 21 debt payment requirement for the Hawthorne NID. So revenues fiscal year to date and proposals for 22. And I apologize, this is a little smaller than I thought it was going to be when I was looking at it on my laptop. So there's some trends here for fiscal year 18, 19, and 20. Those are actual numbers that run about 10 million to 10.6, 10.5. When you get to 2021, that is 12,600,000, and that is because it includes the $1.8 million that we will receive as part of the American Relief Plan. American Rescue Plan. Thank you. So that is what is included in the 2021 and the 2022 revenue numbers, because that is afforded in two different pieces. So we receive half of our $3.7 million in 21, which we will get in the next 60 days at the latest. And then we will receive the other half of $1.8 million in fiscal year 22. And I think we've got some discussion for the American Rescue Plan later in today's work session. The capital improvement transportation sales tax money, remember that is our gasoline tax, our motor vehicle fees, and sales taxes on our motor vehicle sales. The state of Missouri takes the total sales for gasoline and the collection of the gasoline tax and distributes that to the municipalities based on population. So that doesn't matter how much gasoline we sell in town. It matters about how big our population is and what our distribution is. I believe there's some discussion about an increase in that tax in legislation. I am not sure where that bill is at the moment to know if that tax is going to go up, which would allow this revenue to go up for us as well. But that's been steadily kind of going down and is scheduled to go down. And again, right now, as long as everybody chooses to basically stay local, stay home, they're not spending as much money, in gas across the state as maybe what was done back in 2017 and 2018. The capital improvement half-cent sales tax revenue, again, is pretty steady. The trend for sales tax for Warrensburg has been about 2.5% on average over the last 5 years, because things are in kind of a supply-demand issue, and there's been discussion about the fact that we may not have the goods available for sales. As I developed the 22 budget, I try to keep a conservative approach to that and only do like a 1.5% increase. Unlike last year when we did 21, remember we developed 21, we thought sales tax was going to go backwards, and so we didn't project as much money in the budget. And in today's budget amendment, you'll hear more about the fact that didn't necessarily happen to that extent. We had some increases in some sales tax revenue, and then April sales tax revenue was down. Well, May sales tax revenue was back up as far as actual receipts. So that's still very much a unpredictable number, but we're trying to watch trends and see, and stay a little on the conservative side instead of going with a full 2.5% or 3% increase in sales tax. So that works for general fund, for the capital improvement half-cent, works for parks as far as the sales tax revenue is concerned. As we go down into Geo Bond, so Geo Bonds were issued in 17, and those are scheduled to partially pay off in 23, and then the rest of them in 27. And so we've got issues in 21 and 22. We'll issue $5 million that's scheduled to be done in August of 21. So again, that's part of the 21 budget amendment. And then 22, we've got scheduled to issue the remaining $12 million of the 17 million issue for the Geo Bonds. So those are for 17, 18, 18, 19, and 2021 is actual property tax receipts that were received in those 3 prior years. And then the this year's, we'll talk a little bit more about what this year's receipts have been, and they're pretty steady. Again, remember that the state likes to keep everything as revenue neutral. So even as property values start to go up, they will require us to roll the sales tax, or not the sales tax, the property tax levy back, so that we don't collect much more than whatever the consumer price index and or new construction is afforded to us. And you'll get more of that as we go through budget development for 22 and approve the tax levy, get those numbers in July and August as final adoption. The Neighborhood Improvement District is those special assessments. Russell Avenue has been paid off. It was paid off in 21. So this is just the Hawthorne piece going forward. Parks and Recreation, Daniel will have a complete presentation on Parks and Rec. So these are preliminary numbers that we have scheduled for one, the amendment for fiscal year 21, and then what we've talked about in 22 as far as keeping property tax revenues basically the same and sales tax revenue with just a slight increase. The TIF monies is based on sales tax, and those stay pretty close to the same as well throughout the years, and that will continue until those are paid off. Water pollution control is based on our fees for our sewer collections. There'll be a rate study done next year to talk about that and the capital improvements that you've all have been presented as part of some of the things that are going to be needed to pay for in that capacity study and information for that. And again, those revenues are pretty steady. Warrensburg adopts the winter water average. So your sewer calculations are basically the same, or your sewer bills that the citizens pay are pretty constant throughout the year based on that winter water average. And so that's what keeps revenues at about the same amount of money as well. Marcy's doing the Visitors Bureau, and we had the increase in the tax for the tourism tax, the hotel tax, went to 5%, and we were seeing some pretty good growth in that in 2019 and early 2020. And naturally, we all dealt with the fact that the hotels were shut down and there was no events going on in town. So that money started to dwindle and go backwards in late 20. We're starting to see that go back up in the last half of 21. We're pretty confident because we've got information from the hotels that they've got reservations and they're pretty full. So we're optimistic that we'll end 21 better than what we had originally anticipated, and maybe even better than what we got approved in the budget amendment that you'll hear later. And then 22 is kind of running on that same line. So we just kind of kept that constant. We'll see if, and again, we'll talk about it mid-year if we need to, if it's coming in greater than what we think it's going to for fiscal year 22. The self-insurance fund is our health insurance for to go to a fully self-insured process. And so those are based on our premiums. I didn't make any changes to that. Greg and I are working with gathering information. The health industry doesn't like to give you preliminary numbers 6 months in advance. They really don't have much idea on how that's going to work. So we'll definitely get more information on how we're going to work on health insurance as we do final development. And so you'll get more of that in June and July as we talk about first reading and finish budget development. So there'll be more information coming on the self-insurance. Questions so far? A lot of information. Tell me if I'm going too fast. So revenue specific to general fund. Property tax has been pretty steady. And like I said a minute ago, it's our changes and increases in our property tax revenues is based on the consumer price index that's afforded to us based on what the state tells and the county gives us that information, and any new construction. So we get the benefit of the new construction, not necessarily the year it was built, but the full year afterwards. This 2021 is a reassessment year. I'm kind of curious with what market industry is doing and what the county is going to give us for assessment values, and we won't get those until July. But that's basically, again, because we're supposed to maintain that pretty neutral base for revenue. There's not much change in the projections for the property taxes. The sales tax numbers are projected to be at $3.5 million, and that's based on current receipts so far. The franchise fees are dwindling as far as the telephone and the cable franchise. We see that continuing to go down, and the gas and electric franchises seem to be pretty steady. We talked a little bit about the lodging tax, and then other revenue is our grant revenue and our collections for fines and fees for the court and for Barb's permits is what is in that other revenue number to get that 12.6. It also includes that $1.8 million in the rescue plan. So for 22, again, there's not much changes in those. There's a little bit of an increase based on that 1.5% for sales tax. We look at the cigarette tax being about constant. Use tax would go up in turn. We had a major increase in use tax for 20 and seems like for 21. And so we're hoping that doesn't necessarily change because habits have now changed and there's more people still shopping online. But we'll watch that use tax very carefully. And we'll also know more as the legislation talks about approving the Wayfair bills on whether or not we get all of that. The franchise taxes, again, we're basically keeping those constant and watch and see if there's a reduction further in the telephone and the cable and any other changes that happen with the franchise taxes. And the other revenue, again, includes is that $1.8 million in the other half of the rescue money that we get in 22. So those are some 22 projections. So there's not much difference between actually is a reduction between the 12.6 million for the rest of 21 and the 12.3 that we have projected for 22. We like to use the general fund projections for this money to pay for operations. So as long as we can keep operations under that $12.3 million, then that anything extra or anything that's afforded to us from the prior year will help fund our capital improvements or our capital requests for vehicles and other capital needs. The projected expenses for 2021 is at $10,776,240. That's 3% greater than the initial budget, primarily due to the salary increases that you all approved and the staff is very appreciative of. 2020 expenses, we ended the year at $10,339,058 for the actual 20 expenses. And that was thanks to staff for taking the furlough days that they took and cutting expenses where we could. We cut travel and training and as we finished up 20. So we reduced the 2020 budget and come in actuals quite a bit less than what we had originally projected. Again, the original budget for 21 was $10.4 million, or $10,448,750. So we've increased that based on some needs and basically the salary. Fiscal year 22 operational expenses will be presented at the next budget retreat that's scheduled for June 14th. You'll hear council staff presentations from each of the divisions about what they've done, you know, what they did last year, what they've done so far this year, what they plan to do, and some of their needs as we finish that development towards, you know, your first reading of the actual budget approval. And fund balances are recommended at 50% of operational expenses. So let's talk about fund balance a little bit. So fund balance is the difference between assets and liabilities. And so it's different than cash. That's not necessarily cash available because fund balance would include any of your receivables. So you've got property tax receivables and other receivables, that's money that has been earned, but not actual cash collection. So we're going to talk about fund balance and where it is right now and where we kind of like for it to be. And then we'll talk about some cash availability that we want to use for actual operations. So restricted funds included the $546,134 as we ended 2020. And that reduced quite a bit. If you look back in 2019 at some old documents, you'll see that was reduced by the $520,000 that was used for the Hawthorne NID. So that was money that was collected from a lot sale out there. And we used that as we finished up 2020 in that refinancing of those NID bonds in December of 2019. So if we use 50% of expenditures for 2020 to maintain our fund balance at $4,835,284, that gives us a total ending fund balance of $5,867,939. That's where it actually landed. So we're ahead of schedule. The difference between those three numbers is the $1,578,790. So council is authorized to use some of that money. And again, we'll talk about the actual cash because that's not full cash available. That's just the difference between what we have in restricted monies and what we have in the recommended 50% balance for funds. Projected revenues, as I stated, is $12,601,560, less projected expenses of $10,776,000. That gives you a projected ending fund balance of $3,404,110, which includes that $1,880,370 for the American Rescue money. So that $1,880,000 is specific to that rescue money. It will be restricted money. It can only be used for those items that are outlined. So that's included in that $3.4 million. So that's fund balance. So when you look at the actual cash available, is the $546,134. It was restricted cash. That's actual cash that we have. And we've designated some of that money to pay for the lighting out for marshals. It's specific to what's in the business park and what we had refunded in the traffic signals. So I didn't factor that in as coming out because I don't know exactly, I don't know that we have an exact number for that yet. So there's $46,830 in cemetery donations. We had set aside $20,000 for tuition assistance for staff to use. And then there's also $80,000 that we need for emergency money for storms. If we were to have more like snow removal requirements or a need to use that money because we have something out of the ordinary happen for storm responses in restricted funds. And those are restricted by you all. They're not restricted by somebody else because like if the bonds were to make you put away money, then we don't have the option to spend that. Where if council decides that they want to spend that money, because they didn't want to use operations for storm removal, for example, then that's the option that council has to do that. So none of these monies are restricted as far as an outside entity such as a bond covenant or a financial institution telling you have to keep this money there. Cemetery donations is the only exception to that rule because those donations are received specific to the cemetery and are to be used based on what those donations stated for the cemetery to use. So the restricted reserve is the $2.4 million that we have, which is 50% of expenditures. And then that leaves a non-restricted balance of $1,915,880. So when you add those together, you've got $4,915,379 in cash, with estimated revenues without the American Rescue monies at $10,721,190, estimated expenses of $10,776,240. You transfer the debt service for the PD and Rachel, what else?
For the PD, the building.
Just the $114,000. PD and something else. I'm sorry. Yes. No.
No, because that's not general.
Because that's not general. I'll look that up. I apologize. And then the $110,000 that we're asking for in the budget amendment, that's a transfer for the debt service in order for us to meet that debt requirement. So that shows revenue under expenditures by $279,570. So we'll reduce cash to that 4.6 million, $635,809 in that. So that includes your restricted money, and that also includes your restricted reserve. But that's your total cash balance in general fund. Questions? Okay, we'll keep going. So I talked about the half-cent capital investment, the half-cent sales tax. So right now, if we maintain that 50% of expenditures that we have planned for capital improvements for fund balance, that recommended at $988,000. We're not quite there as we have projected for ending for 21 at $720,151, but we're really, really close. And there's not a requirement that says that you have to do that as a recommendation, so that if we have an emergency repair come along and we need to fix a road or a storm, then that money is available in that half-cent sales tax fund to do that. So that's the premise for that 50% of expenditures available, is so that it covers any emergency things that are not anticipated and or planned. Actual cash balance is $409,625 with estimated revenues of $1,976,000. Right now, capital expenses are at $541,760, and the debt service payment is $1,434,240. So those are based on actual revenues, meeting expenditures and debt. So you don't have a change in your cash balance of $409,000. So that we talked about the fact that you might remember the half-cent sales tax has debt associated to it till 2029. However, that sales tax is scheduled to sunset in 2025. So your current debt payments are just at 1.4 or just under $1.4 million for fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. And then in 25, we pay, so in 24, it pays off the 2013 debt, but we still have 2017 debt that goes out to 2029. And so that debt payment drops to $503,000 beginning in 2025. So if the half-cent sales tax is not renewed before it sunsets, then that $500,000 would need to come from general fund to pay that. So keep that in mind. We were really successful in approving the Geo Bonds. And I think if we do our homework and make sure the citizens know what we're going to spend this money for and why we need it, then, it will be successful in being renewed. I would recommend a non-sunset in it. So it basically pays for your capital expenditures, your buildings, your vehicles, your equipment, any land purchase if there was any of, so basically all capital items. So that's capital defined as anything greater than $5,000 with a useful life of greater than a year.
You said that we'll be putting that on in April.
April of 22 is the suggestion. And if that's something that council is willing to tackle in April of 22, then we'll make sure that we include that in the budget. And, so we've got, because that's extra money that we pay out for the election that happens. So that's just, something that we want to make sure that we include in our plans and that we know that that's going to happen. And then we can plan going forward as far as how that money is to be spent.
Go ahead.
No, finish your line of thought first. I don't want to.
Well, that's something I would support, but we also kind of talk to if Parks Department's going to go for Nathan or how that all works. But I think we need to, I'm glad you brought it up. We need to have that discussion because having it sunset before we're done is gonna make general revenue kind of ugly.
Right.
We thought last year was ugly. This will be worse, right? So, okay.
So my question was, because is there like a 6-month or a 4-month delay from the time that we start collecting, that we pass it to the time that actually starts coming in?
That's on a new tax. So,
Okay.
so the key to this is to have it passed no later than, and
Okay,
then
so this would be there'd be no
Right.
interruption. Okay.
there would be no interruption in this, unless we let it completely sunset as of December of 25. If for some reason, it doesn't get renewed before then you're right. It's a quarter. So if the tax is passed in April and it's a new tax, you don't start collecting it until after the second quarter ends, which would be in October.
Okay, so there's like a 6-month.
Right.
um,
Questions on half-cent sales tax? And you'll get more information again. Again, this is just the revenue side. So in June, we'll talk about the expenses and what we have planned. But a big chunk of that for 2022, of that, $1.9 million in revenue is 1.3, almost $1.4 million in debt service. So that only leaves us about $500,000 left for capital improvements for 22. So the debt will be top priority, and then anything left over, we'll go from there. So the transportation capital investment, again, is the transportation sales tax is the gasoline tax, the motor vehicle fees, and the vehicle sales tax that's collected with the sale of the vehicles. That recommended fund balance based on current year expenditures is $368,000. We ended the projected we began 21 with $553,304. Our actual cash balance is $433,079 with estimated revenue of $736, capital expenditures currently at $642,050, and then $93,950 is not debt service. It is a scheduled transfer to reserve, because the difference between the 736 and the 642, that's a typo, sorry. That's what I get for reusing slides. Don't get everything changed. So our estimated ending cash balance based on everything coming back equal would be that same $433,079. And the 50% of unrestricted cash, because that is all unrestricted cash, and so council is authorized to spend up to that, based on how you want to maintain fund balance. So you have nearly that whole $200,000 that would be available, which we may need, so this transportation money, remember, pays for all of the transportation monies. So all of our roads and any improvements to sidewalks and stuff. So we'll piggyback into whatever's needed to help fund the $17 million in bond issues going forward. Did that pretty well, less than 45 minutes. You guys didn't have enough questions. So other questions, things, more information that you want to know, things you want to see for the 14th, and as we start to talk about an approved budget going forward.
Personally, I always like when you bring that, like in June, is let's talk about reserves. I think we should have a healthy reserve balance. I'm not indicating that we spend it, but, and then anywhere for me as a person that we can relieve debt, because I'm not a big believer in debt, because it's just interest you got to pay out, and then you get yourself in these areas where you have sunsets on something that you are going to have to figure out how to pay for. So if there are any suggestions from staff on how we can reduce debt load so that those funds can go into.
You know how we have a strategic plan for the Warrensburg strategic development plan? What do you think about the idea of coming up with a 20 or even a 30-year, with the understanding that future councils are not bound by it, but at least articulating that as part of our planning process, of how we reduce that over a 10, 20, 30-year period. Because I think for us to talk about reducing our overall debt service and the interest burden, we're really looking at 20, 30 years process or even more.
I don't disagree. I know like things that similar is, if I remember correctly, we started putting money away to buy like police cars, et cetera. Am I correct? Or we talked about?
That was talked about. And then, okay, so as that was started in 2019, I believe. Maybe, and some of the 2020 budget included that. But then as 2020 came along, we were unable to identify that funding source.
What happened in 2020?
Yeah, what happened in 2020? And so to do that is to set up a lease-like process so that each one of your operational divisions, streets, police, fire, would then be required to make a like lease payment into that fund to actually move that cash over. And again, you're actually moving cash over so that you then would have that cash available to purchase whatever piece of equipment or vehicle is needed at the time. So that was developed, but it wasn't ever put into policy. That was one of the things that we were talking about doing as we started the 21 budget and looking at what we weren't sure how 2020 was going to end. And so if that's something that, staff will need to look at and the divisions will need to look at if they can afford in their operational pieces to set money and actually move cash over from general fund into that vehicle replacement equipment fund to provide for purchases.
Personally, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I think the discussion's good. I don't want to talk over my peers if they have points on it, but I know, again, it's an industry thing. I used to pull a certain money out every month of operations and set it aside. And then when other folks were having bad times, we were investing. And so there's a savings concept that I think is worth having.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can do something like that for cash or mostly cash,
Mm-hmm.
It's better than debt, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do. I don't disagree. And in my processes, in my history and experiences in other municipalities, the capital improvement sales tax money a lot of times was used for just exactly that. It was used to buy, however many police vehicles, fire vehicles, street vehicles and or equipment, any one of those pieces of equipment that falls into that capital line item. So if you had $1 million every year coming in, then you could spend that $1 million, whether it be for construction or equipment. So you kind of segregated it based on need, on how much was construction money and how much was actual equipment and or vehicle money. And that's just one idea to talk about. And if we've got extra monies available, like fund balance and extra cash, over and above what we need for reserve, and council directs staff to put that aside to purchase vehicles, or says, wait a minute, we didn't purchase any vehicles in 2020 or 2021. We need to make sure that we got money available and purchase vehicles in 2022. So that's some of our discussion going forward and direction from you all that we'll be looking for as to how you want to spend any extra monies that would be available from ending 2020 better than what we thought, and looks like ending 21 even, a little bit better than what we thought. So that puts us in a good position for development for 2022.
That was my question. I know there's discussions that we have 6 months of reserve.
Mhm.
Are we still maintaining that?
Right now, yes.
Yeah, I didn't know because of 2020 if we had to tap into that at all. Or
That was one of again, thanks to staff, because we, the city staff cut expenses pretty dramatically in 2020. you'll hear any one of your department directors or any one of your staff members will tell you, I took my furlough days, we cut back on expenses because we didn't do any training that we didn't have to do to maintain a certification. We didn't do anything extra. It's like, wait a minute, I don't necessarily need to have this much in supplies, right now. I can maybe put something off a little bit, to see how revenue comes in. And, that's been one of the things that I think that city staff did a very good job as we did 2020, of doing that. And part of your thanks to them was that 3% increase that we said, that money's available, that money's there. We were able to do that. And we're hoping, because the strategic plan discussion said that we wanted to make sure that we had employee morale and retention, was a pretty high focus. So we're hoping to develop even more available to the employees and staff, because they did what they needed to do in 2020. And thanks to them, we're in the position that we're in right now.
So I have a question kind of for the city council, the other member of the city council. She was really like 2 years ago now. We had discussed at one point putting on the ballot a public safety tax that would be earmarked for, as I recall, police and fire.
You missed that discussion earlier before. The state legislature chose not to forward that. And we have to have legislative approval.
We have to have approval. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember now. All right.
Yeah, the state said no.
Can we reapply for that?
Yes.
Did they give us reason why they?
The way I understood it, and Danielle, you might have some more information, but the legislation had started to add things to that bill.
Okay.
And so because there was extra stuff that they were adding to that bill that they didn't necessarily everybody agree with, they just nixed it all together. And so all of those, and there was several cities and towns that were listed in the region to get that, or to be allowed to ask the voters for that public safety sales tax. So we'll reach out to the representatives and ask them to pre-file that bill, because there's a pre-file option to do in December, to pre-file that with the same list of cities or more cities if more cities have asked, as we go through and start the 22 legislative session.
What is there any cost associated with filing that, or?
There's not with the legislation side. They've not asked
Just
us
when we
for
put it on
any.
the ballot, then there's.
It's right.
Cost. Okay.
So we have a cost of the election, for that piece of the election, whenever that's afforded. Anything else? Thank you
very much. for
very
your work.
much.
Oh, that's me again. I'm sorry. Okay, item number 3.2, American Rescue Plan. Danielle, I think you're up.
Gary, can you get my slides up, please? Thank you. Oh, I forgot. I got the clip up here. Sorry about that. Thank you all for the opportunity and for coming in early at 4:30 this afternoon so that we had a little extra time to look at the revenues and expenditures in preparation for FY 2022. We also wanted to have a discussion with you all regarding the American Rescue Plan. As you will recall, the federal government has provided this American Rescue Plan to the tune of about $360 billion to be injected into state, county, and city local governments to really look at trying to stimulate the local economy and to rescue our economy from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the first time in history that the federal government has given direct allocations to municipalities. Usually those are, either grant funded and passed through the states. So this is a very unique time in our history where we are anticipating these direct funds to come directly to us. I wanted to go over just a few numbers that you all may have already seen in the news. But this is the breakdown of the injection that states, counties, cities, tribal governments, as well as non-entitlement local governments and territories will be getting. Those numbers are in billions. The difference between a metropolitan city and a non-entitlement local governments, that number actually comes from community development block grant numbers. If you are an entitlement community, you must be over 50,000 in population. If a city is under that $50,000 mark, they're considered a non-entitlement local government. The reason this matters in this conversation is because metropolitan cities will actually be getting their direct allocation from federal government. Ours will actually be passed through the state. However, we don't have to submit a plan for it. We don't have to tell them how we're going to be spending the dollars. They have 30 days to turn around and get those funds back to us. Additionally, on the timing of when those funds will be distributed, they actually issued additional guidance today. So cities should be, if you are an entitlement community over 50,000, they can actually apply to request their funds be released as of today. And so we're anticipating getting our money probably towards the end of June. Again, just wanted to look at some numbers. So the state of Missouri will get $2.82 billion. Another number we are going to be tracking very closely is the Missouri, part of this allocation is for capital projects. So the state of Missouri is actually getting $195 million for capital projects. So we anticipate that a lot of that might go towards MoDOT. So we're tracking that and kind of trying to keep an eye on it. Counties are getting 1.19 billion. Cities are getting 830 million. And then the other local jurisdictions is about 442. So the total American Rescue Plans that are coming into the state of Missouri is 5.48 billion. How that breaks down for our community specifically, Johnson County is getting 10.48 million. We are getting 3.76. And then our other smaller cities are also going to be getting a pretty decent amount of money for those smaller communities. So the American Rescue Plan funding objectives are to support urgent COVID-19 response efforts to continue the decreased spread of the virus and bringing the pandemic under control, replace lost revenue for eligible state, local, territorial, and tribal governments to strengthen support for vital public services and help retain jobs, support immediate economic stabilization for households and businesses, and address systemic public health and economic challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic. We get additional guidance for state and local fiscal recovery funds. So that is for the support of public health expenditures, such as funding COVID-19 mitigation efforts, medical expenses, behavioral health care, and certain public health and safety staff. Address negative impacts caused by public health emergency, including economic harms to workers, households, small businesses, impacted industries in the public sector. Replace lost public sector revenue, using this funding to provide government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue experienced due to the pandemic. Provide premium pay for essential workers, so offering additional support to those who have and will bear the greatest health risks because of their service in critical infrastructure sector. The fifth one is invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, making necessary investments to improve access to clean drinking water and support vital wastewater. We received additional guidance on how cities can spend these funds. Today, it's 151 pages, so we will be working through that. However, the one big thing that did come out of this is for the infrastructure investments, they did add stormwater. Makes it a little more interesting, right?
I don't know, we have water, sewer treatment plants that need upgrades too.
So one of the questions, so a couple of discussion questions, we want to open it up to the governing body, is, how would you like to see these categories prioritized? How would you like us to prioritize our internal needs versus our external needs? How would you like to see the funds distributed? As we develop grants, how much do you expect recipients to contribute? How would you determine if we were successful at spending these funds in our community? A little bit of background, we have a task force that's working on this and starting to bounce around some ideas. So we have Barb Carroll, the Community Development Director, Marcella, the Finance Director, Marcy Bryant, who is our Tourism Director, and then of course Mason and myself. We've been looking at some ideas, bouncing some things around, brainstorming, where we see some needs in our community. One of the interesting things about the revenue shortfall piece of that is we were very fortunate when we looked at our sales tax numbers, in that it's like we stopped our leakage to Kansas City during the pandemic. So our sales tax revenue numbers were not as impacted as some other larger communities. We did see shortfall in our gas tax. So that's what we use to fund our street maintenance programs. And we also saw a decrease in some recreation programming in Parks and Rec. And we also saw a decrease in the lodging tax. So those are some revenue shortfalls that we did see. So that is an opportunity if we want to try to backfill those revenues. As I mentioned, yes, we can invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, and they did add that stormwater piece. We do have the wastewater treatment plant upgrades that will be necessary in 2025. However, these funds must be spent by 2024. So additionally, we have a dedicated revenue source for stormwater. A dedicated revenue source for sewer. We do not have one for stormwater. Again, another thing that we want to point out, most of the webinars that I have been sitting in on have suggested, when we look at household assistance or we look at small business assistance, making sure that we are not overlapping with any other efforts from any other entity that would also be playing in that field, such as the state of Missouri. They have about $360 million in rental assistance that they're trying to distribute. We also know that we have, there are other places out there who are working with small businesses to get them grants for websites, for, trying to trip to the crossover from bricks to clicks. So I've talked to Tracy Brantner with Johnson County Economic Development and kind of talked to her about, what are you all looking at doing with your funds, and trying to make sure that we're not overlapping and getting into something where, doing something someone else is already doing with their American Rescue plans. So with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to you all and hear your thoughts on the American Rescue Plan.
Well, one point you made that came up to my head is that if the city focuses on what the city's core competency on, and let the other organizations such as economic development, et cetera, focus on what they're, because city doesn't have staff or expertise dedicated to some of those other external needs. So that's just a thought.
Can we go back to that previous slide of yeah. So as far as provide premium pay for essential workers, is that what we're talking about with working with the county, so we're not overlapping, or is that something separate that we would look into?
So again, one of the things that they've blessed us with is some very broad flexibility here in how we put this together. So when I see provide premium pay for essential workers, one of the things that we've been seeing would be, for example, we could do a grant to restaurants for their, is who they have dedicated that they're essential workers and grocery store folks. And so they could apply and try to get reimbursement for their employees' pay. We could also look internally and look at who our essential workers are. Those essential workers who have, really placed themselves in the line of risk and health, such as our firefighters and our police officers, wastewater workers, that, at risk for that infecting themselves with the COVID-19. So I think that there are a couple different ways to look at that. That could be a potential source for the sign-on bonuses that we are trying to look at for some of our public safety positions. However, we have a lot of salary savings because we have so many vacancies. So.
So whenever it talks about public health expenditures, do you have more details on what that?
Yeah, so
I'm just,
quick
like you said, the overlapping, I didn't know,
Sure.
like with your hospitals, Johnson
So-
County Health, and how.
like I said, I haven't had an opportunity to read through the 151 pages that they sent us today. They've summarized it as, COVID-19 mitigation efforts. So, that could possibly be, outfitting our front lobby. So we have our temporary system set up in there. It could also be, our PPE, our supplies. There's been talk about doing some COVID off the shelf COVID testing that might fall under that as well. So these are areas that wouldn't necessarily fall into an overlap. So the federal government stopped their, everyone was given that 80 hours of emergency sick leave. If they were to get sick, the federal government has stopped that. We could use those funds to backfill some of that. However, we haven't had anyone who has fallen ill in quite some time. Looking at, behavioral health care, I'd have to dive into that one to give you an example of that one. I'm struggling to come up with an example for behavioral health off the top of my head that would be related to a COVID-19 mitigation effort. That would be an internal city. So
I think it's probably more along the lines of just being contained all this time, just how people are
yeah,
adjusting
and
to
we have
getting
our
back
employee
to.
assistance program, so maybe we could use it to supplement our employee assistance program.
And you said wastewater, or not wastewater, stormwater, thank you. I know it had water in there somewhere. You said that was eligible for these funds?
Yeah, it looks like, so when they originally released this, they said, how can make necessary improvements to access clean drinking water, support vital wastewater, and broadband infrastructure. So they had left stormwater out of there. So a lot of municipalities, we are not the only municipality who struggles with finding a funding source for stormwater issues, by the way. So a lot of entities across the United States are like, we really have a lot of stormwater issues. Can we tie that into our wastewater efforts? Because really wastewater and stormwater are trying to do the same thing, and that is improve access to clean drinking water, because when it's clean, when it goes in, it's easier to clean it when it comes out. So trying to tie all those things in. So they have added, yes, stormwater.
So if we used it for stormwater, how much could we get done with that money? Obviously, we could go from 0, like 1 foot, right, for, stupid, but, or we could put 1% or 100%. So if we put 100% of those resources into it, what would be the maximum amount of stormwater drainage repairs, new stuff put in that you think we could do? So for instance, McGuire is obviously a big project we've been talking about for years.
Yes.
So, but would that even be enough to scratch that, or would it be enough to do a section of it, or would it be enough to?
So remember that we're going for a raise grant. And so a lot of our stormwater issues on McGuire, we are going to try to address with our raise grant. It would be very difficult for me to tell you exactly how many stormwater projects we could do. With that $3.76 million, I can tell you it would be very easy for us to spend that whole $3.76 million on stormwater. We have started tracking a list of some of the very severe issues that we have around town. So we finally got and I'm just trying to give you some estimates
Right,
of how much
right.
stormwater cost. So
This is off the cuff. I appreciate.
so don't, kind of hold me strictly to some of these numbers, but so for example, we know we have a stormwater issue over in Creech where they have that storm detention basin behind that storage facility.
Mhm.
And we know that we have some collapsing pipe and it goes down into Creech and Chaucer and is causing some flooding over there. And it's a very big pipe that is starting to deteriorate. I believe it's 48 inches or maybe even 60 inches.
Mhm.
And we got a price to line that and it's $500,000. So we could go through the whole 3.76 million very quickly. We know that we also have a lot of work that, well, this is a bad example actually, because it's part of we think we can include it in the McGuire raised grant application, but Shepherd's Park, because that is all the water from McGuire goes down into Shepherd's Park. And we know we've got deterioration there and it's undersized for how much impervious surface we've built up along McGuire. So, that would be another big project that we could work on. We are trying, like I said, we're trying to get that rolled into the raised grant. So that wasn't a very good example. But I mean, all you have to do is drive by Lions Lake and you can see, that's also another stormwater issue. We've got a lot of silt starting to build up in Lions Lake. So I would, we have, like I said, we have started preparing this list of a lot of these different stormwater projects that we have around town. In preparing you all to have a conversation about trying to identify a funding source for stormwater.
So when do we have a couple weeks to give you better answers as we reflect this? Because off the cuff, my first thought would be you backfill where we were short and we go forward with stormwater, but that's really without talking to my peers at coffee or having any reflection time, if you will. I don't know.
Yeah, and I was leaning towards the provide premium pay for essential workers. So yeah, it's a discussion we need to just.
Yeah, like I said, we are not, we do not anticipate getting these funds until June. They have to be spent by 2024. So we have some time to really put some thought into how we want to use these funds in our community to try to provide some of that, some of the strategic goals that we have. And, this is kind of an opportunity to look at some of those strategic goals that because of revenue shortfalls, we weren't able to start looking at, as well as, trying to see if there's one of the things that I keep thinking about in my mind as we're trying to think of how we can inject these funds back into our local economy is, how can we make this quite literally a concrete improvement that we can see and we'll still be able to see for 20, 30 years after the American Rescue Funds have dissipated and we don't see that cash flow into our community after 2024. So I'm happy to answer any questions as you guys think about this and kind of noodle over it. I'm happy to sit down with anybody and talk through kind of what staff has talked through already. I think we were a little apprehensive to have that conversation because we don't want to, kind of already predetermine your all's minds. So.
Yeah, but you're the process expert, so it's healthy to tell us.
Can you send us out, or at least me out, this presentation?
Absolutely.
So
A little time to mull over it.
I don't think we bought any new vehicles or would that qualify for under this? Because we put it off because of expected shortfalls due to COVID.
I think we could look at if we had some of those revenue shortfalls to purchase some vehicles. We talked about how this is the first time in history the federal government has trusted municipalities to take federal dollars and implement them like they asked them to be implemented. So while we have a lot of broad flexibility, I want to make sure we are being responsible with these federal dollars and doing with them what Congress asked us to do. I think they have given us a lot of flexibility here. So I just want to be judicious about that. So I'm not sure if vehicles would be a good option outside of what revenue shortfalls were. I will, if you guys are interested in hearing some of the ideas that staff has tossed around this morning or this afternoon.
I very much so.
Okay.
Yep.
So one of the things that we have tossed around is increasing what we already do with our downtown facade grants. So right now the limit is 3,000. So looking at if we were to bump that up a little bit, as well as lowering the match. Another thing that we have talked about is doing some public improvement grants. So let's say we have a small business who is looking at redeveloping a lot in town, an infill lot. One of the feedback that we always get is that we require that curb gutter sidewalk, as well as there's any stormwater improvements or if there is any widening of the street. And a lot of times folks say, well, you've just killed my project because I can't afford that. That increases the cost too much. So if there would be a way that we could provide a grant to step in and maybe pick up some of that expense during these tough economic times when small businesses are trying to come in and do some redevelopment. Another idea that we have tossed around is, it would not necessarily be a public improvement that folks could see on the outside. However, if there was a business that was interested in going in downtown and it was somewhere that needed a sprinkler system, a lot of times that's something that can be very cost prohibitive for some of these small businesses. So could we do a fire suppression grant? We have talked about, also if we have some, a restaurant who is interested in maybe upsizing their grease trap. Again, that's something that can be very expensive for folks. So can we give these small businesses that? We're really trying to stay away from any kind of household assistance because that gets very hard. We feel like we have the grant system in place with our downtown facade grant program that we can kind of extend that to some of these other ones. So we already have that system in place. So we're trying to stay away from any kind of household assistance. We think that that's an area that will be overlapped a lot with some of the other social services that are provided with other jurisdictions. And just because that those do tend to get very heavy as far as, verifying income, verifying that you have missed a rent payment, verifying that you are behind on your mortgage. So trying to avoid some of that household stuff. We've looked at premium pay and how we can, distribute that and trying to distribute it in fair and equitable ways. We looked at the wastewater piece of this. Kind of one of the reasons we were like, because we do have that dedicated funding source for wastewater and the big improvements that we need to do will not be here until 2025 or after that. We've looked at broadband infrastructure. We actually think we have a pretty good system here in place. I know the county is looking at trying to maybe do something with their broadband. Another thing that we have looked at and had quite a bit of conversation about already is, one of the areas where we saw a revenue shortfall was the lodging tax. And one of our strategic plans is to build a visitor center. So they've seen a shortfall in revenue. When we also know that one of the industries that has really had one of the biggest negative economic impacts is our tourism and our lodging industry. So can we be creative about if we can do some, so a lot of our hotels also did not qualify for some of the small business assistance that was originally done with the CARES Act funds because they were not small enough. They had too many employees when they started looking at the part-time stuff. So trying to see if we can be creative about how we can help our hotels. And then also, as I previously mentioned, we have a strategic plan to build a visitor center. So is this an opportunity for us to build a visitor center, use some of these funds to supplement funds that are already available, that the WCVB has been saving to do this and really start boosting our tourism. So those are just a few of the things that we have tossed around. Have I forgotten anything, Marcella or Barb or Marcy? So Mason. Okay. So yeah.
Would something like sidewalks and curbs be eligible for this money? Because there's a lot of areas that we want to put in sidewalks that have been a struggle.
I think it depends on how we couch that. So, you notice they included stormwater. They did not include streets so far. I don't think they included that in the 151. And so I kind of look at sidewalks and curb and gutter as a street improvement. I think if we did it as a public improvement grant for a business, and we gave that money to them, I do think that we could include the sidewalk, curb, gutter, and any kind of widening of a street.
What is the other members of the council think? Do you think that's of the kind of what she mentions? Does anyone have a knee-jerk reaction to a preference or any strong feelings on one over any of the others?
I'm just gonna have to take time to think about it.
Think about
Because
it.
whenever I'm thinking about the American Rescue Plan, I'm thinking of them wanting us to utilize the funds to stimulate the economy, to help businesses and people get back on their feet. And so capital projects is just not something that I think we should be focusing a lot of funds on. I think it should be more people and business oriented. I mean,
Keep in mind, of course,
Yeah.
right? Just another thing to keep in mind along that thought process, that capital improvements do provide good paying jobs.
Yeah.
In our community.
yeah, I understand that.
Then-
Yeah.
Just,
So, I mean, with those capital improvement projects, will we be hiring more or would it be done with existing staff?
I mean, it would depend on the scale of what it was and what we would be doing, but most likely that would be hired out.
Carl, I do see your point. I guess my thought is that maybe it depends on how you view it, because if the infrastructure you put in helps generate more jobs or more business activity or facilitates business activity, I think you could reasonably make that argument. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But do you mind if I ask, when you're thinking about this, where do you feel like the funds could be used best? Because I just want to get a sense of what you're thinking.
Oh, no, that's just what I was saying. It's just to stimulate the economy, provide growth for, the unemployed, different things like that. So that's why I said I just want to do more research and more thinking about it before I commit to any specific thing. I don't want to.
I got you.
I just think, there's a lot of things that it could help a lot of people and a lot of businesses, and just thinking strategically on how to implement those funds is something that I need to look into. So ask questions, talk to people.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
If this sounds agreeable to all of you, on May 24th, we will be having HDR come in and talk through the scope of work that we will be applying for the RAISE grant for on McGuire. So after that conversation, we should have a few minutes. Again, we slated that for a 4:30 start time. So we'll have a few more minutes to revisit that at our May 24th meeting, if you think that gives you all enough time to kind of process this and do a little bit of research and talk to folks in the community.
Or
Does that
at
sound
least
like a
to
plan?
come up with plan A,
Do what?
or at least to come up with plan A.
Absolutely. So, and as staff, the other thing is now the funds are starting to become available. We're starting to kind of see what some other cities are doing and how they're trying to do this. So we'll be able to get some more examples that we can talk through as well. So.
For me, I'm very interested in what you and the rest of the staff think on. So like when you mentioned grease trap, that struck me as a really good idea that I never would have came up with. So we can give you some high level, but I think, and I appreciate you letting us go pre, but I'm really trusting in what you guys do as professionals. So
I also like many of those ideas that you guys have already started working
Yeah.
on, and would encourage you to continue to brainstorm collectively and then to share your findings just as they become available so that we can be thinking of those same things in preparation for the meeting on the 24th.
Okay. Good.
yeah. All right, item number 4, if there's no other discussion, I'll call meeting adjourned.
Have fun. I've got a jet, but I'll be back as soon as I can. So
Okay.
Don't wait for me, just dive in. So.
Nolan again.
He's in the back.
We're all big people. We can get. Yeah. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order.
Brooks. Kushner,
Here.
Lund,
Here.
Bentley,
Here.
Holmberg.
Here. Okay, item number 3, approval of city council minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Brooks,
Yes.
Kushner,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Bentley,
Yes.
Holmberg.
Yes. Item number 4, adoption of agenda.
Move to adopt the agenda.
Brooks,
Yes.
Kushner,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Bentley,
Yes.
Holmberg.
Yes. All right, item number 5, we have 3 proclamations, so bear with me. The first one is 5.1 Building Safety Month proclamation. We have some folks come forward. I have kind of a list. Lee and Justin, and I know Brent, is that?
And Joe.
Joe? Brent, Joe, and Justin. All right.
Yeah, he's got the most hair though.
All right. Man, don't start a fight up here, man. Don't start a fight. I'm gonna go with it. He's always organizing somebody. Okay. So Building Safety Month. So whereas the city of Warrensburg is committed to recognizing that our growth and strength depends on the safety, economic values of the homes, buildings, and infrastructure that serve our citizens, both in everyday life and in times of disaster. And whereas Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role of our community's largely unknown protectors of public safety, your local code officials, to assure us of safe, efficient, livable buildings. And whereas this year's theme for Building Safety Month is Prevent, Prepare, Protect, Building Code Say, encourages all Americans to raise awareness about the importance of safe and resilient construction, fire prevention, disaster mitigation, energy conservation, and new technologies in the construction industry. Building Safety Month 2021 recognizes that the implementation of safety codes by local and state agencies has saved lives and protected homes and businesses. Now, therefore, I, Scott Holmberg, Mayor of the City of Warrensburg, along with the other members of City Council, do hereby proclaim May 2021 as Building Safety Month in the City of Warrensburg, Missouri. Thank you. With this group as a private citizen on some projects and was a very good group. Helped us a great deal keep people safe. So I appreciate what you all did. Thank you. Okay, next, National Police Week. Do we have any officers here? Hey, Chief.
Mr. Mayor.
Come on, Chief. You have a better camera than that.
I do, I just didn't bring it.
All right.
That was pretty good though.
Oh, is it?
Got the skinny lens on it too, I need that.
Same thing as I start, I've had the opportunity to work with the police department, different needs that we called, and always outstanding. I'm very proud of our city. So whereas National Police Week is the week of May 9th through 15th, and whereas May 15th has been declared as Peace Officers Memorial Day, and by a presidential order, flags are to be flown at half-mast on this day. And whereas 2 Warrensburg police officers, City Marshal James Ryan and Officer James Basham, were killed in the line of duty being shot by a single assailant on April 1908. And whereas in 2019, 56,034 peace officers were assaulted, 17,188 peace officers were injured, and 150 police officers are killed in the line of duty in the United States. In 2020, 264 peace officers were killed in the line of duty in the deadliest year since 1974. And whereas peace officers in Warrensburg and our surrounding community bravely serve the public and unselfishly risk life and serious bodily injury. Now, therefore, I, Scott Holmberg, Mayor of the City of Warrensburg, Missouri, do hereby commend our peace officers, recognize their service to our community, and hereby proclaim the week of May 9 through May 15 as National Police Week, and May 15 as Police Officers Memorial Day in Warrensburg, Missouri. Thank you again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. I'm the M smile. Okay. Next up, National Public Works Week proclamation.
We have to start early, so this is past their bedtime.
Well, that's all right.
So that means she gets to stand up.
I'll do it. So National Public Works Week proclamation. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities, and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of people of the city of Warrensburg, Missouri. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals, who are engineers, managers, employees at all levels of government and the private sector, who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's transportation, water supply, water treatment, solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures, facilities essential for our citizens. And whereas it is in the public interest for citizens, civic leaders, and children in Warrensburg to gain knowledge of, to maintain an ongoing interest and understanding of the importance of public works and public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas the year 2021 marks the 61st annual National Public Work Week, sponsored by American Public Works Association, Canadian Public Works Association. Be it now resolved, I, Scott Holmberg, Mayor of Warrensburg, Missouri, do hereby designate the week of May 16 through 22, 2021 as National Public Works Week. I urge all citizens to join with representatives of the American Public Works Association, Canadian Public Works Association, and government agencies in activities, events, and ceremonies designated to pay tribute to our public works, professional engineers, managers, and employees, and to recognize the substantial contributions they make to protecting our national health, safety, and quality of life. In witness thereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the city of Warrensburg, Missouri to be affixed. So these folks too, I mean, not only they do the things you see, but many community events that they get out and help with Bird Fest, et cetera. So please give appreciation to the staff.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mayor.
Good job.
One of these days, I'm gonna knock that off and everybody gets a good chance to laugh. Okay, give me a half a second, please sketch back up. All right, item number 6, presentation. Police use of force policies presented by Chief Rich Lockhart.
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of the city council, I was asked to share with you a little discussion about our use of force policy here in Warrensburg. And hopefully, oh, this thing, okay, this is my first time doing this, so. Okay, I can't read my presentation. Okay. What is police use of force? Police use of force is essentially us trying to get people to do something that we want them to do. So I don't know if you guys can read there or not. I apologize for making such a small font. Use of force includes things verbal, physical, chemical, impact, electronic, and firearms. So we'll talk about all those things as we work through this as well. If you have any questions as we're going through it, feel free to ask. It's kind of an interactive thing, so hopefully, oh my goodness. I apologize. All right, let me see if I can read it off of this one right here. Types of resistance, we have passive compliance. So in passive compliance, you've got somebody who's basically doing what you want them to do. So think of a traffic stop. The officer asks for your driver's license, you hand it over to them. That's passive compliance. Passive resistance is when somebody doesn't want to do what you tell them to do. So think of you're drunk down on Pine Street when you're like, I need to see your ID. And they're like, what do you want, officer? That's passive resistance. They're not really doing anything, but they're not following your instructions either. Active resistance is when somebody's actively trying to get away from you. So this is the case where you're trying to make an arrest. The person's pulling away from you. They're not assaulting, but they're just trying to get away. And then the last level we have is active resistance that's assaultive. This is when somebody's not only trying to get away, but they're actually assaulting the officer to try and do it. So those are our types of resistance that we deal with. Why do police use force? The first thing is to establish control in the situation. So we are kind of control freaks. When we go somewhere, we want the situation to be under control. We don't like chaos. We try and restore order. So when we get there, somebody's not behaving the way they should be. That's the first thing we want to do, and we may have to use force to do that. We want to protect others. So that's the other reason we use force. If somebody's assaulting you, we're going to use force to go in there and stop that to protect you from somebody doing that. When we make an arrest, we use force. And what people forget a lot of times, even police officers, is that putting handcuffs on somebody, even a compliant subject, is still considered a use of force. So when we're making an arrest, we will use force as well. The guidelines are established in a court case from 1989. It's called Graham versus Connor. And in Graham versus Connor, they established that it was an objective reasonableness. You may have heard this in the news recently as they talk about police use of force. They talk about, are the officer's actions objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting them without regard to the underlying intent or motivation. So when you think about this, you normally think of criminal cases where somebody has a criminal intent. I intend to steal something from you. In police use of force cases under Graham, the officer's intent isn't part of the formulation about whether or not the use of force is appropriate. So you don't look at the officer's intentions or motivations. You just look at what the officer is doing in that situation. And then the next thing you want to do is the reasonableness of the application of the force to be judged from the perception of a reasonable officer on scene. You can't use the hindsight of 2020 to judge whether or not the use of force was reasonably appropriate. So objectively reasonable to a reasonable police officer, not a private citizen, with the facts and circumstances he or she had available to them at the time they were using the force. So if you consider the George Floyd case, that case was examined with 2020 hindsight up until the time that the verdict came in. Now that force was not objectively reasonable. It was not anything that was appropriate under Graham versus Connor. I only use that as an example to show that that's what happens in police use of force cases. People evaluate them in the cool after the moment with that 2020 hindsight. Graham versus Connor says that's not how you decide whether or not force is reasonable or unreasonable. All right, there are also a list of factors here that we use under Graham versus Connor. The first one is the severity of the crime that's at issue. So if you've got somebody who's jaywalking and they're resisting your arrest and you're using force on them, jaywalking is not probably something you're going to want to use force on because it's not a severe crime. So I'd say you can't, but it's just to say that that's part of what you want to look at. If you're chasing a murderer down the street and you're using force to apprehend, that's a severe crime. You're probably going to be able to use higher levels of force if the person is offering resistance. Whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of officers or others. So if you have somebody who just murdered his whole family and he's running out of the house, you're going to chase him until the wheels fall off of your car or until the shoes fall off your feet. And if he resists your efforts, you're going to be able to use a higher level of force on him than you would somebody who didn't pose a danger to the public. Again, this is all based on, yes, go ahead.
Sure. So how does jurisdictional boundaries affect that? So if, you see someone crossing the city limits boundary.
So if we're in fresh pursuit, we're allowed to pursue beyond a city limit. And if you're in Kansas City, you're even allowed to pursue over state lines if you have fresh pursuit. You can't bring them back across the state line, but you can bring them back across a municipal line to make an arrest. They can't flee the city limits to flee an arrest. And then lastly, whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. So if your subject is actively resisting arrest, then you have the authority to use force to effect the arrest on somebody who's resisting or fleeing. Deaths from police use of force are pretty rare. In 2008, there were an estimated 67 million face-to-face encounters between police officers and community members, deaths from a use of force occurred in 1 of every 67,000 contacts. So that's about a 0.0015. So 0.0015% of the time. An extremely rare thing that happens. Now, you wouldn't realize that from all of the reporting, because what you see reported in the news is these things are happening every day, and they do about 3 times a day in the United States. There's about 1,000 deaths at the hand of police in the United States a year. But when you consider there's about 18,000 police departments and close to 700,000 police officers, you begin to see the scale of the problem isn't as big as what it might appear on the news. The last time a Warrensburg officer used lethal force was 2013. That was on a high-risk search warrant. One of the people in the house fired a weapon at the officers, and the officers fired back and killed the man. But before that, if you go back to probably 20 years ago, when an officer had his throat slit and he shot and killed the guy that slit his throat. The officer lived, the bad guy didn't. The officers rarely use physical or chemical force. We average probably less than 10 of those a year. We answer about 25,000 calls for service, do about probably 1,200 traffic stops. So again, you're talking about a very low percentage of the time that we're using force. These are our use of force options. So our use of force options actually start off with officer presence. So the uniform, the officer standing there is considered a use of force. So we encourage officers to display what we call command presence in a way that it's basically a projection of confidence to let people know that I'm an authority figure and I'm here to conduct some business officially. Verbal commands are our next use of force option. Open hand techniques. These are things that we call wrist locks. So you see somebody grab your hand and try and twist your arm back. That's a wrist lock. Those are the open hand techniques. A baton as a control technique. We use 2 different kinds of batons. We have a PR-24, which is a side handle baton. We also have an expandable straight baton. Both of those batons can be used to create what we call an arm bar. So you just insert it through the arm and you can get somebody's arm in a handcuffing position. We can also use them if somebody's got arms under their body and we got them on the ground, we can use them to try and get arms back. When we use them in those manners, it's called a control technique. We can also use it as an impact weapon. So if we have somebody who's resisting arrest at the proper level, we can use a baton to deliver strikes. We don't strike the head. We generally strike, we want to have some big muscles in the leg, push to the back of the leg, try and buckle the legs or the arms or the back or something like that. That way we can try and get some compliance that way. And then we also have OC spray. It's a chemical spray. People call it mace. Ours isn't mace. It's oleoresin capsicum. It's like cayenne peppers, really hot ones. And we spray that. Typically we'll aim for the face when we do that. It creates a lot of snot and a lot of tears. And I know that firsthand because I've been sprayed not only in training, but also in the field a lot of times, because when that stuff comes out, it doesn't have a directional component to it. So whichever way the wind's blowing, that's the way it's going to go. The other thing we have is the conducted electronic weapon. That's the taser. That's a really effective weapon. It's one we just added to our options a few years ago. You all approved that. That one's really effective against somebody who's under the influence of narcotics or alcohol, because it disrupts your musculature. And so what it does, it disables somebody for about 5 seconds so that you can, again, get them handcuffed. That's the ultimate goal. And then lastly, we have the firearm. We have 3 firearm options. We have a handgun, we have a shotgun, which doesn't get used as much, and we're probably going to phase out. And then we have the AR-15 patrol rifle. We've got our draft use of force policy. That's in your packet. I want to go through that with you real quick. This is still in the works. We started going through this last year before the pandemic hit. And so we've had to pause on this right now. This policy is created with the CALEA standards. So it's, again, if you remember CALEA, it's an international body that governs policy. So this is a best practice policy for use of force. So if you look in the policy part of it, you're going to see that it has the sanctity of life. You'll hear that quite a bit when you're talking about police use of force policies. Essentially what it says is that we will only use that reasonable force that's necessary. And then it will also consider the sanctity of life as being very important when we're using force. So we're going to do everything we can to not kill somebody. We're going to use every force option we have before we get to that point. That's a real big hot spot in police policy making right now. The second one is that you see the objectively reasonable there. I'm looking in the first paragraph again. That's straight out of Graham versus Connor. That's still the guiding policy, court case for police use of force. And then we're only going to use the amount of force that's necessary to be able to gain control of the situation. That's our goal, is to get the subject under control. And once he's under control, then the use of force is over. And then the next thing we've got in there is the duty to intervene. So if you go down under guidelines, we've got, maybe it's up in the policy part. If you look in general provisions, item number 4 is called the duty to intervene. So an officer has a duty to intervene to prevent or stop the use of excessive force by another officer when it is safe and reasonable to do so. So all the police reformers are talking about this duty to intervene. This is going to be in our policy. So you'll know that we're on the cutting edge of all these things they're talking about. And then next thing is de-escalation, and that's in point B there. We've been training on de-escalation since we started doing CIT training just after I got here 5 years ago. So all of your officers have a basic 4-hour block in de-escalation, and we reinforce that regularly. One of the things that we really talk about doing is when we get into a chaotic situation, if the only person that's a threat is being a threat to themselves, we're slowing that situation down. And we're not going to go rushing in, and we're not going to create a dangerous situation for us because this person's dangerous. So think about a suicidal subject inside of their home, posing no danger to their family, their neighbors, or the general public. If you start looking at some of these issues under the Graham versus Connor lens, the person's committed no crime. They're just suicidal. That's not a crime. They aren't a danger to the public. They're only a danger to themselves. So 10 years ago, we would have gone in there and we would have kicked the door in. We would have gone in, either gotten in a fight with the guy, shot the guy, tased the guy, some type of use of force. And then after it's all done, we're going, what did we just do? And you have to start now trying to justify what you did. What we're teaching our officers now is slow it down. If there's no urgency, don't create the urgency, because we can surround the house or wherever this person is. We've got all day. We did this just about a month ago over off North Street. We had a woman inside. We thought she had a firearm. We surrounded the house. We could have gone in and tried to force our way in and force a situation. We talked to her for about 45 minutes. It was pouring down rain. I felt bad for all the officers out there. But at the end of that 45 minutes, she came out, she gave us the gun, and we were able to get her into a hospital for treatment. No one was hurt. We just, it took us a little bit longer than it normally would have. So that's where police departments are going. That's where we are. And I think we were probably ahead of the curve on that one. Any questions about the policy itself? All right. Let's see what else we got here. Deadly force. One of the things we don't do warning shots. Some departments used to do warning shots. It was in our policy when I got here, and I took that out. And then the last couple of years, some departments have started putting it back in. We're not going to do warning shots. You got to be concerned about where that round's going. You fire a round into the ground, you still got to be concerned about where it's going. If it ricochets, it could hurt somebody. So just not a responsible thing in my mind for us to do. We don't use deadly force when the person is only a threat to themselves or property. So that's another thing that you'll see on newer policies, updated policies. Again, trying to force it. This is the suicide by cop, and we're just simply not going to oblige them until they pose a threat to us or to a member of the public. We've never been authorized to use chokeholds. That's another thing you hear in all the police reform right now. You've seen them. That was what happened to Eric Garner in New York City. He was put into a chokehold. We've never been authorized to use those. We were authorized to use a lateral vascular neck restraint, which is a completely different thing from a chokehold, but we are no longer going to be using those in our updated policy as well. That one's really difficult for me to let go of because the person who invented the lateral vascular neck restraint was a KCPD trainer, and I learned it from him. He invented it in 1972. There's never been a documented death or serious injury from the lateral vascular neck restraint. But because it looks a lot like a chokehold, a lot of departments are doing away with them and not allowing their officers to continue to use them. So we're going to discontinue them as well.
If it's effective, then what are we replacing it with?
We're not replacing it with anything. We're staying completely away from the net.
But if you have to restrain someone, you have to have some technique to restrain them. So
We've got all the other use of force options you saw. We've got the open hand techniques, the baton, the chemical spray, the taser, and obviously we have lethal. But we feel like those options give the officers enough options to be able to bring somebody under control in a way that doesn't get near the neck. It was a tough one for me. KCPD still does it. They didn't give it up. And some departments have allowed it if there's lethal force allowed. And that was one of the things I looked at, but I felt like, we're not going to kill somebody by doing that. So we're not going to put it in there with lethal force because it's not lethal force. Any other questions? If you have any later, feel free to contact me and let me know. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, items 7, first reading of an ordinance. So 7.1, an ordinance approving and accepting final plat of Cahill lots 195 through 219, a subdivision in the city of Warrensburg, Missouri, located on Larson Avenue north of Veterans Road, presented by Barb Carroll.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. This is the 6th phase of the Cahill subdivision. This is out in the northeast corner of the city along Veterans Road. This is, if you're turning into the subdivision from Highway 13, this would be right as you come into the subdivision to the north on your right, goes up across the lake and takes a turn to the left in a long cul-de-sac. This phase involves 25 lots on the north side of that lake, as well as some down the east side of Larson Avenue. Several of the lots are currently zoned general business, and the applicant has submitted a rezoning request to turn the majority of those, request those to be rezoned to R1 single family, which would be consistent with the subdivision plat, and then a portion of it to be rezoned to R4 medium density multifamily. And there's one lot on the subdivision on the south side of the newly proposed Lakeview Way, lot 195, that would be in the proposed R4 district. And then the rest of the district would go south from Lakeview Way down to Veterans Road. So when the project was originally conceived, it was prior to the bypass being constructed. And so there were some questions as to the final exact layout of that and where it would be and how that would impact surrounding areas. And so that land was zoned general business at that time. There would still be general business to the east of this area between HH and Highway 13. That's owned by a different, that's owned by the Brady family. That's not controlled by Baldrich's. So this is land that the Baldrich LLC had. So the Planning Commission recommended approval with a long list of conditions at their meeting last week. Those have been incorporated into the staff report as well as into your ordinance. And one of the things that was discussed at that meeting with the applicant was the right-of-way for Lakeview Way. That has previously been a emergency access road that the fire department required. And the maintenance of that is to be at a standard that would support 80,000-pound fire truck. And at this point, the developer would prefer to go ahead and build that entire access road out as a city street. So the whole right-of-way in comment number, which one? Comment number 8 is to show it as city right-of-way all the way from Larson to HH. Because his intent is to build it as a city standard street. And once it looks like a street, people are going to want to drive on it because it looks like a street. And we don't want to have confusion about who maintains it and who's in charge of it. And can we write speeding tickets on it or can we not? Because it's a access road and not a city street. And so he wants to build it all as a city street. So we would have that full right of way shown on the plat before the Mylar is recorded. At this point, I think I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think the rest of the comments are kind of more housekeeping items. They would not change the layout or boundary of the plat itself.
Okay, no questions. Okay, item 7.2, first reading of an ordinance. An ordinance authorizing the city manager and city clerk to execute a contract for municipal advisor services between the city of Warrensburg, Missouri and Piper Sandler and Company, presented by Marcella.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you this evening is the request for the financial services. So the citizens of Warrensburg authorized us to issue $17 million in Geo Bonds for general obligation. And this original contract was entered into 2016 as a contract with Piper Jaffray and Company for municipal advisor services. In the meantime, Piper Jaffray has changed their name to the Piper Sandler and Company. And in order for them to assist us in issuing the debt, we're just asking that this contract be upped and change in the name as the primary piece for doing this. Unlike the amendment that was done to this contract in 2019, when we refinanced the Hawthorne Neighborhood Improvement District debt bonds. So if you have any questions, please let me know. There was no change in the terms, just basically a change in the names.
That was my question. Was there a change in terms since it was a change in company, company name, but you just said there wasn't, so.
Okay, no questions. We'll go to item 7.3. First reading of an ordinance amending ordinance 5607, adopting annual operating budget beginning October 1st, 2020 for the city of Warrensburg, Missouri. Marcella, you're back up.
Thank you, Mayor. So before you this evening is the ordinance amending the adopted budget for fiscal year 21. This basically is giving you a rundown on what we have projected for revenue and expenses. The biggest highlight in this is the $1.8 million in American Rescue Plan money, the 3% increase in the salary expenses. There is some changes to the sales tax money as well. So in the table on page 2, it gives you a rundown of what beginning balances, revenue, and expenditures were, and any changes in those fund balances for those accounts for each of the funds. So the total revenue and expenditures have actually a difference of negative $843,590, primarily because water pollution control includes the depreciation budget. And so that takes water pollution control in a negative respect for revenue and expenses because of the depreciation. There's lots of numbers there in all the pages, but it gives you what was originally projected and approved for 2021 as the parent budget in those schedules that are attached. And then the 21 amend is the first comparison and shows you the differences in each of those funds as the changes that we made in both revenue and expenses throughout each of the funds. Lots of information, primarily the rescue monies. So questions?
If we don't have any questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 8, appearances of council not listed on the agenda. Okay. Have any? So item number 9, miscellaneous matters from the mayor and or city council. Anything?
Nope.
Okay. I will note, I asked staff to go ahead and put together the raw notes that we had with Parks Department. I don't have any detailed comments on it. I just thought it was important to start sharing conversation and I sent a note to each of the council members and we'll try to connect, since we can't connect in group, and we'll just follow up, but I thought it important to share that discussion. Any other?
I have something, but it's not, so I guess it's more of a general question. Maybe it's just because I've become more aware of it, but I feel like there's more homeless people in Warrensburg right now than maybe years past. Again, that could be just my perception, but it's a really complicated, difficult issue to deal with. And I guess I'm just kind of wanting to voice and see what the other members of the council think. Is there any actions or anything we want to do to look into it further, or to try and make a help some people? I mean, it's a bloody mess of a problem. I mean, you have economic issues, you have mental health issues, you have substance abuse all tangled together. But I know several of you have a lot more experience with these types of issues than I do. And I've had several people approach me over the last 2 or 3 months, maybe, bringing it up. So I guess part of the question is, has anyone else been approached about this as well? Because we can't just all email one another. So I'm really addressing towards the rest of the council.
I haven't been contacted.
Are we aware of anything that is generally effective on a municipal level that we can do to address the issues or address this type of problem?
Councilmember Brooks, if I
Go ahead.
could, yes, we have heard rumblings at the staff level of a perceived increase in the number of homeless folks that we have seen downtown, as well as we have been notified of a couple homeless camps on vacant properties around the city as well. So we, being staff, we did meet with community development, the police department, and we've started these conversations. As you've already noted, they are challenging. There is not an easy answer. So we have started having those conversations at the staff level. One of the things that came out of that work group was that Chief Lockhart and I did reach out to some of our community partners to discuss, why might we be seeing an influx in homeless folks around town? Are they coming in from other communities, or are we actually seeing an increase in homeless from Warrensburg residents? We believe that we're seeing a little bit of an influx from other communities coming to Warrensburg. And so we've just talked a little bit about, what that means and how we can talk through, we don't necessarily have a lot of resources here to help with our homeless folks if they're, coming from a bigger place such as Springfield, or if they're coming from Kansas City, Missouri, that they're much better off there because there are more resources available to them there.
Do we have any system in place, like reporting, to track or to approximate how many people we have out there living in these camps and trying to
Once
make
a
it?
year, the census does not the census. Once a year, they do a point in time count. They usually do that in January because it is easier to find them because they are trying to find shelter. So it's easier. They're more congregated, so it's easier to count them. I'm not sure what our 2021 numbers were, but we can get that information to you, and we can compare that to previous years.
Is that online anywhere, or that I can just go and look at like a graph, like see if there's any trend lines or anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can get you that resource.
Okay, thank you.
One question you ask, and I probably would, being in social work, maybe closer in. So yes, we have the homeless camp toward Blind Boone down from Visitor Center. I gave a person a ride Sunday, and so I'm active in And sometimes working with folks and, I talk with folks when I'm working with them, and we do have, because we had some community groups that I think are doing a good job, but you have created services. And so the woman that I gave a ride Sunday is not from Warrensburg. And so we do have, when you create services, it's good. You also
It acts as a magnet.
create attraction. And so, and in no way do I want to say that the services between the folks in town and just south of town are bad or unnecessary, but it is a uniquely complex problem. And we do have folks, they have to leave in the morning, and so they tend to go downtown. So you get the library, you get other places that are public. And so, point's valid, and I've had folks, I do get called. I get called quite a bit, probably.
I spoke to a community leader a while back, and she was complaining wasn't the right word. She was voicing her frustration with the fact that at least she had people showing up at her location from as far as away as Chicago, and she had said that they were given train tickets to come here because they were aware that we had good, programs. I don't know if there's any legal recourse. I wouldn't think that there would be. Because you have the right to move around the country however you want. And if you want to give someone a train ticket somewhere, I don't see how we could sue them and be like, hey, no more train tickets. But, I've just had a few people bring it up to me, and I realized just how difficult it is. And I try to explain that, but, I don't know what it is we can do as far as bringing awareness or actions to take. You know what I mean?
Well, again, I'm probably wearing two hats here, and the issue is, and gosh, Chief, you probably have far more detailed knowledge, but the issue is usually complex. And so, in my opinion, since you brought it up with council, is the government should be as limited as possible, because you have freedom of the street, freedom of movement, et cetera. I do think we need to enforce rules and laws on the books. There's no issue with that. But I think the approach of staff working with community partners, because that resolution will be more helpful long-term. And I don't know what to do when you have a business downtown, Rise had a store downtown, and I didn't like some of the exchanges. So it is an issue. But what council or government should do, I think, is empower and work with the folks that are expert in all of the myriad of why someone's homeless.
So I guess, and I'll cut it off after this.
You're fine. It's worth talking.
I guess my question is that comes to mind is, how do we facilitate, the not-for-profits and, help them be successful? And I honestly don't know an answer to that.
And I think it's more of it's a community problem. It's a Johnson County problem, not just a Warrensburg problem. It's just that we see it more within city limits, because we have a lot of the businesses that they come to looking for amenities. So I think with staff working with Johnson County and the surrounding areas, I think that's the best course of action, to let them share resources and knowledge in order to help solve that problem. As far as us being able to put anything in place as a council, I don't think we'd be able to do that with the efficiency that them partnering together would be able to do.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm recommending any action or advocating. Well, it's more just reaching out to others and seeing if you guys are hearing the same things I'm hearing. And like I said, I know several people on this council has a lot more experience with this type of situation and than I do. So I'd rather bring it up to the council as a whole instead of having way more coffee than I need. So.
I think it's worth the decision, but anything else or? All right. Item 10, mayoral appointment. So Tara would like to be on the council liaison as diversity and inclusion, and Nolan, I've talked to him via text and he's good with coming off of that. So I'd like to appoint Tara Bentley as council liaison to diversity and inclusion committee.
Move to approve?
Brooks,
Yes.
Kushner,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Bentley,
Yes.
Holmberg.
Yes.
It's okay.
I don't know if I should even-
Takes a few weeks to learn.
Yeah, no, he can vote for himself.
Yeah, I know. Okay, item number 11, city manager report.
One thing I wanted to follow up on from a comment that was made during our previous work session, the question, or it was brought up that Senate Bill 394 had been turned down. So that was our public safety sales tax. And because that there were some additional amendments that were made. And I wanted to let council know that the amendment that was added that was the deal breaker was that any city within a county that imposes an earnings tax would be required to put the question of exempting minimum wage earners from the earnings tax on the next ballot. So loosely related to a tax issue, but not related to a public safety sales tax. So that is why that was defeated. So we will work again next year to follow up on that. Wanted to let you know, we talked about the May 24th work session, and HDR will be coming in to talk through our raise grant application. We have slated that to begin at 4:30. We do think that it will be a good conversation that could potentially take about an hour and a half, but I want to be respectful of all of your time. So if you think that we need to push that to 5, please let me know, or 5:30, and we can try to make that work. I know 4:30 is kind of in the middle of the afternoon. So. And then lastly, we previously did a presentation on inclusive parks with Danielle Fessler from the Parks Department. And then this evening, we did another presentation regarding our use of force policies with Chief Lockhart. I would like to do one of these presentations at least once a month. I know Council Member Brooks was the one who reached out and asked about the policy on the use of force. So if any of you have any particular services that we provide here at the city that you would like to do a deep dive in, I think that we are open to suggestions, and we'll try to bring forward those sort of educational opportunities at least once a month for you all. We will probably not have it be Marcella or Public Works because we're going to have a lot of time in front of you the next several months. So we'll try to mix it up, and maybe we'll have someone from community development or something come in. But so that's all I
Personally,
have this evening, Mayor.
I like those. I think it helps us educate the community. I learn something every time. Is that it?
That's all
All
I have.
right, item 12, Director of Finance report.
Well, you've heard me talk a lot tonight, but earlier in more session, I was talking about the general fund debt and couldn't recall what those two pieces were besides the PD equipment. It's the street sweeper. And so those are the two pieces that make up that $114,000 a year that we spend in debt service on top of the $110,000 for the Hawthorne Neighborhood Improvement District debt. So that's the answer to that question. And then if you have any other questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Anything else going around the room? Anybody on Zoom? Parks, Chamber, Chief?
Ronnie Katz is retiring this Wednesday, 3 o'clock, so we'll be over at the PD training room. If you know Ronnie, want to come by and say goodbye. He won't be going far. He He's going to be available with the Johnson County Courts. So he'll just be up at the Justice Center full time, and you can say hello to him there. But if you want to stop by Wednesday at 3, he'd love to see you.
HR, before COVID, we would go around the room and I think it kind of got complicated, but any staff or any chamber, Main Street, anybody online? Very good. Yes, ma'am.
I just have one update. A couple weeks ago, when we did the council tours, you guys got to go in the pump room in the community center and look at the pool pumps and the slide pump replacement that we're working on. We're still in progress. However, today I got a call from MPM, our pool management company, and the Chemtrol pump, which is what pumps the chemicals into the pools, is now gone. It's broken. So we are going to have to replace that pump as well. I don't know any costs. MPM is working on that. The lap slide pump was about $18,000. And right now, MPM is able to hand feed the chemicals. That's no problem. It's just an inconvenience. So we are working on that.
Nothing else, and we're going to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Don't leave yet. I need you to sign
Before we
there.
go away. I know, since Brian's gone, at least CDB's